Assalamu alaikum. Hello, everyone. So first of all, I would like to thank the ArchiNet team and for the invitation and the opportunity you guys gave me to share with you my thought about a subject that is very important to me and very important to, I feel, to every architect and urbanist and interior designer that is out there, which is behavioral design. So before starting, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Afrad Abdellah. I'm a Moroccan architect from Agadir. I graduated from the National School of Architecture in 2013. And after that, I worked in the private sector in Rabat and Casablanca. Afterwards, I worked for the Ministry of Interior in the small but very lovely city of Shishawa. After that, in 2017, I got the scholarship, the mixed scholarship from the Japanese government to study at the University of Tokyo, from which I graduated with a PhD in last September. So right now I'm a teacher at the Architecture School of Casablanca, the l'EAC, and a teacher at the Artcom School of Interior and Graphic Design in Casablanca too. So in this presentation, we will first talk about the concept of behavioral design in relation to architecture. We will then introduce the nudge theory and discuss its application in architectural design. And finally, we will talk about our PhD study and the most interesting results. So let's start with the introduction. So first of all, before starting to define behavioral design, we need to understand that the idea of individuals affecting and being affected by the configuration of their immediate surrounding is not a new or reserved to a certain architectural elite, as way back in 1924, almost 100 years ago, Winston Churchill, who obviously wasn't an architect, stated to the English Architectural Association that buildings play an essential role in defining human character and action as much as humans define buildings' characters. So it isn't an overstatement to say that it is well known that architecture affects all aspects of our being, how we think, feel, and act. And that this knowledge is not a novelty. So, however, what is relatively new in the field is the realization that human behavior, which can be defined as the actions and reactions, basically here the choices made by individuals in their interaction with their physical and social environments, were made in a conscious, logical, and rational way. Whereas the opposite is true. Humans tend to function on autopilot and make decisions based on emotional and based on emotions and on the settings of the environment where the choice or the behavior is made, which means that designing for the rational and logical human being is equal to designing to human beings that actually do not exist. So we'll define behavioral design in this presentation as the branch of design that combines psychology, notably environmental psychology, design, technology, experimentation, and other methods to define the motor behind human behavior in order to achieve behavioral change through interventions, in our case, in space. So one such way to influence behavior was first introduced by the behavior economist Nobel Prize winner Richard Taylor and Harvard Law School professor Cass Sunstein in the theory developed in their book, Nudge. So Taylor and Sunstein define a nudge as any aspect of the choice architecture that alters people's behavior in a predictable way without forbidding any other available options. Rather than placing restrictions or changing economic incentives, nudges influence behavior by changing the way choices are presented in environments. So this simple yet revolutionary theory proposes that small indirect suggestions, easy and cheap to avoid, can subtly and disproportionately influence the behavior and decision-making of groups or individuals. You can think of the nudge effect as the tiny small domino that topples the huge one in a domino chain reaction. So as Taylor puts it, nudges work because customers, or in our case, urban or architectural space users, are more often than not busy, lazy, and confused, and are likely to choose the simplest option available. So the nudge theory is based on the simple assumption that individuals don't make rational decisions and tend to choose the default option offered to them whenever they can do so, due to multiple reasons. For example, decision fatigue that happens after a long session of decision-making, or to being on autopilot, which actually happens all the time while walking, driving, or doing daily routine tasks, or due to the inherent desire for conformity that has been proved to induce irrational behaviors just because everyone else in the community does the same. So we will now give some examples of nudges. We want to stress that actually there is no such thing as a neutral space. Nudges are everywhere. And perhaps one of the most interesting and representative, funniest examples of the application of nudge theory in architectural space was in the Schiphol airport in Amsterdam back in 1999, where the angry maintenance team wanted to change the behavior of their male visitors after noticing a pattern of excessive spillage around the urinals. So the team applied some small decals in the shape of the generally disliked house fly in some of the urinals, and found that the urine spillage around the toilet was cut by 80%, presumably because men cannot help but take aim at the housefly, saving on cleanup costs as well as alleviating unpleasantness. In the Japanese context where I developed my PhD research, the nudge theory is applied at a huge scale, especially in crowd management of train and subway stations, particularly in Tokyo, that has the biggest and busiest train stations in the world with over 13 billion passenger trips each year. So despite this huge number, these stations are the most effective in the world. So, to reach this level of organization, the rail operators use very sophisticated engineering, planning, and psychology to predict human behavior in design, and implement nudges in an imperceptible manner in order to manipulate the behavior of passengers through lights, sounds, and signals. The impact of these nudges can be a contributing factor in addition to the sociocultural and economic factors to the orderliness and safety of Japanese train stations compared to other contexts. It's therefore easier to understand the difference between those two pictures here when we see the complex signage system used underneath. So these complex signage systems nudge commuters into organizing themselves into lines by destination, using different colors and arrows, and at the same time shifting different train line stops few meters. The result is the minimization of commuters' movement and maximization of ground space use. Nudging is also used to save lives in Japanese train stations where, on average, every day, one person leaps into the path of oncoming trains to commit suicide. Operating on the theory that exposure to blue light has a calming effect, train operators installed blue lights as a suicide prevention measure. And the result was surprisingly effective in reducing the number of suicide attempts by 84%. So not far away in the Tokyo Narita International Airport, the architects of the new Terminal 3 used the nudge theory in an innovative way to organize travelers' flows through the installation of racetrack lanes in the transition areas. The racetrack is a global symbol that nudges travelers into walking fast. And the orientation of the flow is color-coded. The blue color symbolizes the sky leading to the departure gates, while the brown symbolizes the ground leading to the taxi, bus, and train stations. So as you can see, and as I came to realize, the extensive use of nudges in Japan had something to do with the extreme organization of the society there. Of course, in addition to social, cultural, and economical factors. And as a PhD student that just arrived to the country, I was fascinated with that aspect of Japanese architecture and urban planning. So, I was wondering what if we could apply this Japanese expertise in order to conceive a nudge strategy in developing countries, Morocco, for example, in order to solve some of the many problems linked to behavior in disadvantaged residential neighborhoods, like littering or vandalism and other anti-social behaviors. This kind of intervention is especially interesting in the case of low-income countries, as nudges are by definition low cost and easy to implement and do not necessarily need a direct costly intervention of the local governments. And also do not represent a threat towards the freedom of choice and may be opted out easily by local populations. So now we'll present our research results. Yeah, in our quest to find such elements in the Japanese context, we discovered potted street gardens. As the name indicates, gardens composed entirely of pots that are present in the Japanese residential neighborhoods landscape in an unequal scale compared to the rest of the world. These potted street gardens were studied since the 70s and 80s in Japan and were associated with increased greenery perception in dense neighborhoods and with the urban green space shortage, which suggests that PSGs are used as a subconscious coping mechanism to green space unavailability. And according to the World Health Organization, which defines urban green space as any private or public land of any size covered by vegetation, PSGs are a form of urban green space. Consequently, potted street gardens may also have the same impact on human behavior, which means that PSGs that are low cost and easy to implement can be used as nudge. But what is the impact of urban green space on humans? The literature review we conducted to answer this question was interesting, as we discovered that urban green space has a very positive impact on neighborhood perception, human behavior, and human physical and mental health. What was mind-blowing actually were the results, such as the one we have here by Cordan and al. Conducted in Toronto, in a research they conducted in Toronto, Canada, which found that having 10 more trees in a city block can improve health perception comparably to, among other things, an increase in annual income of $10,000 or being 7 years younger. So this research and many others attest that urban green space is a nature-based solution to many issues related to the stressing urban lifestyle, and shows that inversely, urban green space shortage represents a health risk factor and an environmental injustice that affects disadvantaged communities, as Cardan and al. results mean also that reducing the number of street trees by 10 in a city block deteriorates perceived health as much as being 7 years older, which means that potted street gardens used as a nudge can also fix a very important environmental problem and social injustice through its impact on behavior. Consequently, in our research, we argued that the change in neighborhood characteristics and the daily behaviors linked to PSG's ownership might have a significant positive impact on neighborhood perception and consequently on locals and outsiders' behavior in the area. PSG's ability to divide areas of control between neighbors also has the potential of increasing cooperation in matters related to cleaning and protecting neighbors' respective territories and resulting in overall improved mental and physical health. In order to investigate the PSG nudging mechanisms, we designed 2 studies. In the first, a cross-sectional study, we tried to identify the kind of relations between PSG's ownership and 3 domains of variables: neighborhood perception with 5 variables, neighborhood attachment and behaviors also with 5 variables, and human health with 2 variables. In a first step, we analyzed the direct correlation between PSG's ownership and our variables, and in a second step, we conducted tests to determine the moderation effects of PSG's ownership on the association between variables. In the second study, we designed a field experiment to investigate the impact of PSG's presence in the neighborhood on outsider visitors' perception of that neighborhood physical setting with 4 variables and on its population with 3 variables. So the 2 studies were actually made possible by the generous research grant we received from the Obayashi Foundation, to which we are grateful. These 2 studies were conducted in Tangier, the northernmost city in Morocco that recently became its 2nd biggest industrial center thanks to its new port in that is the biggest port now in the Mediterranean Sea. The construction of this port in 2007 led to huge investments in the city, attracting workers from all over the country. Consequently, the city's population doubled in less than 15 years. 56% of these newcomers settled in Beni Makada, Tangier's most disadvantaged district, with the highest poverty rate, 14%, versus 7% in the rest of the city, and the lowest per capita green space, 0.27 square meters. So Beni Makada happens to be also the district with the most potted street gardens in Tangier, thanks to a government initiative, the Madinati Ajmal program, started in 2016 to improve life quality in the neighborhood. As a result, the neighborhood attracted media attention during the COP22 that was held in Marrakesh, and inspired many neighborhoods in Tangier and in Morocco to start their own street potted gardens. All studied PSGs are privately owned and present on the public ground, back to back with houses So in our visits to the neighborhoods, we noticed that all first floor windows had metallic security bars for safety reasons. Streets were dirty, mainly with candies and biscuit wraps, and noisy, especially in the afternoon and in the weekends when children are out of school. Front yards with PSGs were relatively cleaner and calmer. So for the first study, we conducted the survey in January 2019 using a random sampling method. The University of Tokyo Ethics Committee approved the study, and after 4 weeks of interviews, we obtained 388 valid questionnaires. After the study, we collected data. The collected data were cleaned and verified. We then conducted regression analyses assessing PhD's ownership association with our target variables, followed by a moderated regression analysis assessing moderation effects, and finally another regression analysis assessing PhD's related behaviors association with the target variables. For the second study, the field experiment was conducted in August 2019 using a double-blind design. Conductors and subjects were not informed about its objectives to avoid biases. Two similar streets were selected, one with PhDs and one without, and 51 subjects were selected using a convenient sampling method and were accompanied in a 5-minute promenade in the two streets with a pause of 5 minutes after each walk. As in the first study, the experiment data were cleaned and verified before conducting the necessary analyses in order to assess PhD's presence impact on neighborhood perception. So, just to have an idea how we obtain the results, we will explain in a moment. For the cross-sectional study, we conducted 60 regression analyses. These analyses assess in the first step the direct correlation between PhD's ownership and each one of our 12 dependent variables controlling for other variables. And in the second step, the analysis measured the difference between the two groups of PhD's owners and non-owners, which is called a moderation effect in our case. The third analysis investigated the direct association between PhD's related behaviors and characteristics and our dependent variables. For the second study, we conducted 7 regression analyses to measure the outside visitors' perception of streets with PhDs compared to streets without PhDs. So in total, we conducted 19 analyses in this study. However, due to time considerations, we will present only the significant results, negative or positive. Let's start now with the neighborhood perception findings, life satisfaction. For the first variable, PhD's owners' life satisfaction score was on average 0.36 points higher for owners than for non-owners. Perceived safety score correlation with life satisfaction was not significant, as shown in the graph here. However, PhD's ownership enhanced the two variables association, which means that for PhD's owners only, an increase in perceived safety was associated with a significant increase in life satisfaction, while for non-owners, this association was not significant. The weekly frequency of behaviors related to recreational activities was associated with a 0.13 points increase in neighborhood life satisfaction score. And these findings show that PhD's ownership in residential neighborhoods is a sign of higher life satisfaction and maybe a potential way to improve well-being in disadvantaged neighborhoods. However, PhD's owners were more sensitive to neighborhood safety than non-owners. So now with the perceived safety. For perceived safety, the first analysis showed that, curiously, PhD's owners were 56% less likely to feel safe in their neighborhoods than non-owners. PhD's ownership had also an enhancing effect on the perceived safety life satisfaction association, which means that for PhD's owners, an increase in life satisfaction was associated with a significant increase in perceived safety, while for non-owners, this association was not significant. The second analysis revealed that 1 minute increase in weekly care duration was associated with a 2% increased likelihood of feeling safe in the neighborhood. So the negative association revealed in this study, in this second analysis, between PG's ownership and perceived safety revealed in this analysis may be explained by PG's susceptibility to theft and vandalism. It is also possible that PGs are a spontaneous coping mechanism to a pre-existing feeling of unsafety, used here as a first line of defense against intruders. In the next section, we will present the results linked to behavior. First, for cleaning responsibility. So we found that PG's owners were 2 times more likely than non-owners to feel responsible to clean their neighborhoods. However, the second analysis detected no moderation effects. In the third analysis, we found that PG's owners having one additional recreational activity type next to their PGs were almost 4 times more likely to feel responsible cleaning their neighborhood compared to those having no activities next to their PGs. So these findings suggest that encouraging PG's ownership and conducting recreational activities next to it might be a potential way to induce cleaning behaviors. So now with the diffusion of this responsibility in the areas of the neighborhood. So first, PG's owners were again 3 times more likely to feel responsible cleaning their neighbors' front yards too, in addition to their own front yards, compared to non-owners. However, no moderation effect was detected. PG's owners having one additional recreational activity next to their PGs were 5 times more likely to feel responsible towards cleaning their neighbors' front yards too. These findings suggest that encouraging PG's ownership and having recreational activities next to it may be a potential way to induce cleaning behaviors and cooperation behaviors in general between neighbors. So we will now present the results linked to human health. First, with physical activity. So for this variable, PG's ownership was not significantly associated with walking duration. However, and curiously, we detected a buffering moderation effect on the walking duration, social capital association, meaning that, as can be seen here, that for PG's owners only, an increase in social capital score was associated with a decrease in walking duration, while for non-owners, this relation was inversed. An increase in social capital score was associated with an increase in weekly walking duration. We also found that 1 minute increase in weekly care duration was associated with a 25 seconds increase in walking duration, and 1 unit increase in recreational activities diversity was associated with a staggering 17 minutes increase in walking duration. These findings suggest that owners that interacted more with their PGs walked more than those with lower levels of interaction. Owners with higher social capital walked less, possibly because they spend more time next to PGs chatting or socializing or taking care of their PGs for the public good. So concerning mental health measured with the PHQ-9 depression questionnaire, we found that PG's ownership was associated with an increase of 0.37 points in the PHQ-9 depression score, while PG's ownership had also a buffering moderation effect on the depression level life satisfaction association, which means that For PSG's owners, an increase in life satisfaction score had no significant impact on depression score, while for non-owners, an increase in life satisfaction score was associated with a decrease in depression score. In the third analysis, we found that 10 minutes increase in weekly care duration was associated with a 0.1 points decrease in the PHQ-9 depression score. These findings suggest that PSGs may have a negative association with mental health. However, the mechanisms of this relationship are unknown. It is possible that looking after PSGs, Potter Street Gardens, in an unsafe environment may be a source of mental health, mental distress. It is also possible that PSG's ownership may be a coping mechanism to a pre-existing depressive disorder due to a territorial dispute between neighbors or with outsiders, as territorial loss has been associated with depression in previous research. So now with the field experiment results. For perceived safety, participants in the experiment rated the street with PSGs as being 3.27 times safer than the streets with no PSGs, which, if you remember, is the opposite of PSG's ownership association with the perceived safety in the cross-sectional study that was correlated with a 56% decrease in safety. For promenade enjoyment, subjects rated their walk in the street with PSGs as 5 times more enjoyable than the street with no PSGs. The same thing happened for neighbors related relations quality, as neighbors living in the street with PSGs were almost 3 times more likely to be perceived by outsiders as having better relations than those living in the street with no PSGs. And neighbors living in the street were again, with PSGs, were again almost 3 times more likely to be perceived as having higher neighborhood belonging pride than those living in the street with no PSGs. So as a conclusion for this second study, our findings indicate that encouraging PSG's ownership may have a positive impact on outsiders' perception of neighborhood physical and social components. These results suggest that a very promising application for Potter Street Gardens ownership in improving neighborhood reputation and the destigmatization of disadvantaged populations. So to conclude our presentation, the main objective of our research was to investigate the usability of PSGs as a behavioral nudge in dense neighborhoods. Our primary hypothesis stipulated that PSGs have the same positive associations with neighborhood perception, prosocial behavior and health as urban green space. Our findings suggest that PSG's ownership might have a significant positive impact in improving neighborhood perception by locals and outsiders, and engineer cooperative behaviors centered around neighborhood cleaning tasks, even in disadvantaged neighborhoods. However, PSG's association with territoriality and its character as a private property may also have a negative impact on its owners by increasing depression and unsafety levels and reducing physical activity duration. The size of the health-related negative associations suggests that PSGs are not a health risk factor, but this association is very interesting in itself and deserves more interest. Another more important finding is that urban policy can affect communities' choice to have PSGs if they are properly encouraged. So, in order to reduce the negative effects of PSG's ownership linked to its nature as a private property, we recommend the design of ground-level planters placed on public space back-to-back with houses mimicking PSGs. Elevator planters were actually found in some neighborhoods, but a large number was destroyed by its owners because of capillary action damage to buildings. So these planters that we suggest are impossible to steal, so they will reduce owners' feeling of unsafety, and may be combined with PSGs as done in Japan, and will serve to delimit boundaries between semi-private and public space. In addition, it will serve as a protection against street noise and provide children and adults with more opportunities to practice gardening in more space and increase interaction with green space. So before the coronavirus pandemic, we were talking with an NGO in the city of Agadir for a possible application of some of these recommendations. However, the lockdown made it impossible for the present time. These are the references we used for this presentation, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Abdullah. We have one voice question from Ms. Abir.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum. Good
Salam.
evening.
Good evening.
The presentation is wonderful. The idea is wonderful, actually. Thank you very much for this very valuable research. I got a bit confused in terms of the variables that you used in your research when you mentioned the PSG, PGS or PSG, you mentioned ownership. So you mentioned that the plants are to be put in the streets, in public spaces, but the ownership of the plant itself, the street plants itself, belongs as private property, belongs to the neighborhood residents. So I couldn't actually figure it out whether you are concerned with the street plants themselves or the concept of ownership, which for me is the main variable that led to all these conclusions. So it was a bit confusing for me whether it's ownership per se or it's the plants. Because if we talk about territoriality and the rights that are the rights the rights that are related to those plants and the public street and the passers-by is not quite clear. It's not legalized. So I don't know. You focused more on the plants than the concept of ownership. So you considered it as a nudge that adding the plants will lead to such conclusions. But it's actually, for me, it's giving ownership and empowerment of people, even with such small, tiny gestures. It is the things that led to such safety measures and feeling of belonging, cleanliness, taking more initiatives in the neighborhood. What do you think? Thank you.
Actually, I'm totally okay with what you said. Actually, encouraging, actually, it's not giving to people PhDs, encouraging them to actually have these PhDs. So this is the nudge. Encouraging them to have these PhDs has a lot of consequences. And we can actually separate the PhD's nature as a private property and as a urban green space. So we can say this is due to its nature as a private property, and this is due to its nature as a green space. You can be okay with me, I think. So
no, what I meant is that, sorry.
Yes.
What I meant is that the nudge will be in giving the right of ownership to people in their neighborhoods, alleys and streets, rather than sticking to one single item that is owned by them. So if we give more ownership to people to feel more belonging to that space, regardless of the means, whether it's plants, it's right of cleaning, right of whatever, but it's the ownership per se. It's not the means of giving ownership.
Actually, yes, if you want to take it this way. Actually, what I meant here is that people in Morocco, in the street, in the neighborhood that we studied here have already the right to actually close their streets to outsiders. I've seen it done there. But when you give them, in addition to that, something to look after outside of their area of control, which is the wall, what separates the house from the street, a new set of behaviors start to emerge. Like, for example, if you give them, people are already placing outside of their houses, they're placing bicycles and motorcycles, but they're not going to spend time next to their bicycles or motorcycles just per se. When you actually add to the thing a touch of beauty like PSGs, it's not a necessary thing. Like, for example, placing a bicycle, when you don't have space to place it inside your house, you have to place it outside. But when you give them the opportunity actually to have something unnecessary in a certain way to place outside of their houses, like especially an item that is as complex and simple at the same time, that is PSGs, you give them more than just the right of ownership. You give them actually the right to transform their space into something that is unvaluable. Okay, green space has no real value. You understand what I mean. It doesn't really have a value in money. It has a value, symbolic value, and it also has an impact on them, in a psychological impact, as that was proved in research as a green space. So this is the objective of actually the nudge, solving many problems with a very simple intervention, that is potted street gardens. But the objective of this study was actually, we already know that green space has a good impact, a beneficial impact on people. But we don't know, there was no study conducted on street potted gardens impact on human behavior and their impact on the human psychology, even in Japan. Because in Japan, actually, even if they have PSGs, potted street gardens, they actually don't have problems in terms of cleaning the neighborhood or things like that. So this was the objective. And as you've seen, there was a good reason to do this research, but as we found that potted street gardens don't have only a positive impact on people's health condition. So it does have a positive impact and a negative impact. And it's up to us now to decide. It's up actually to researchers to actually do more studies to identify which one is the most important. Can we actually forget and neglect the bad impact of PSGs on people, or is it something that we have to take in consideration?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, we received a written question from Yas Bin. It states, congratulations on the presentation, dear friend. I read the title. I imagined the subject also included interior area, how architecture and also the design space can impact the behavior. I don't know if you focused on if you focused your studies on PAG and some details we can add on the existing space, or also include how the design and architecture can improve the behavior. I'm sorry, I don't know if that was clear to you, Dr. Abdullah.
Actually, can you explain the question? I didn't understand it very well. Actually.
Sure. So if I'm understanding it correctly, they are asking if your study or your dissertation was focused on the PSG, to be added on the existing spaces and or included on the architecture and the behavior. Mr. Yas, if you can please take the mic and maybe explain the question yourself. Mr. Riaz?
So just to answer to what I understood from the question, my PhD was actually centered around the impact of potted street gardens as a form of urban green space on human behavior, neighborhood perception, and health. So it was a subject that was very interesting in the context of Japan because PhDs are everywhere and they have studied since the 70s and 80s. So, but actually in the Japanese context, they don't really have a big problem with anti-social behaviors. Neighborhoods are cleaned. There's no work for police there. You understand what I mean? So there's no vandalism. And so they never actually thought about studying PhDs as a form of urban green space and orienting it, using it to change behavior in that context. So it wasn't, because it wasn't relevant, but in our context, where actually police has a lot of job to do, and we have many problems that can be easily solved by just changing the behavior of normal people. It's very relevant actually to think about this kind of interventions. The dissertation, the thesis was oriented towards the neighborhood space, public space, not about architecture. But we can actually use this kind of interventions inside to solve problems. The case is that this approach to architecture is kind of new and old at the same time. So before we used to do that without really thinking about the theory of nudge. But since 2008 or 2007, when the book came out and it was cited 10,000 times by academics, so it was it's kind of new discovery. You see, the person, the scientist that wrote this book, one of them anyway, Taylor, had a Nobel Prize in 2017. So people are kind of starting to apprehend this concept and use it in architecture. By the way, the other day I saw an architecture competition that was started in France, and the name of the building, the competition was how to design a nudge building that would be adapted 100% to the behaviors of its future residents. So that's all I have.
That's awesome. Dr. Abdullah, we also received another question from Ms. Abir.
Yes.
It states, the question was, the study was conducted in a Moroccan neighborhood. Does culture and society and the society's background affect the results? As an example, can you generalize the results, or is it exclusive to the Arab Islamic society?
Actually, this research was never conducted outside. It's the first time that it was conducted in Morocco. So I actually expect that there will be different results. If you do the same study in Japan, you will probably not have this relationship between PhD's ownership and the lack of safety feeling, because it's Japan. It's a very safe country. If you do it in Morocco in a safe neighborhood, you will have probably different results. So it's not really about the context, cultural context, but it's you can have different results in the same country. There will be, of course, you will have a pattern, a model that will be constant. Like, for example, the PhDs will always be from what I understood in my research, PhDs will always be a sign of life satisfaction, probably. They will also be a sign of people's willingness to clean their neighborhoods, but their impact on mental health will probably be different, probably. And from what I've seen, it will greatly depend on the context of the neighborhood, because Right now, the neighborhood that I've studied is quite special. It's Beni Makada. It's one of the most disadvantaged neighborhoods in Tangier. So it's not really the common neighborhood in Morocco. So I expect that I will obtain different results if I do the same research in different contexts. But the methodology is the one that is the thing that is special about this study. We can do the same study using the same methodology to many other objects, like for example, as the lady in the first question said, we can use the same methodology to study the impact of actually leaving cars outside of your house. This kind of research has already been done by a professor of mine that supervised my research in Japan. So this is what I have to say. What I have to say is about this question.
Understood. Dr. Abdullah, the last question that we received was what we saw. It was by Miss Noura Karam.
Yes.
So what we saw by the relevant examples was symbols, light, colors, and innovative ways. But for me, the architecture construction that completely accentuated the nudge in the Jewish Museum in Berlin. How do you have any concrete conceptual architecture example that could predict the behavior of people?
Concrete architecture example. I think that I already presented one of them in the example I gave in the Narita airport. So it's a project that was designed as it is, as I presented. It wasn't modified. From the very beginning, the architects thought about making the circulation as fast as possible, and consequently they designed the walking sector, walking areas as a racetrack, as racetracks to organize the circulation. People are not really aware that this was designed to make them walk fast. So it's a kind of a nudge, because the racetracks are symbolize for us the competition, the race. So this is an example of the use of nudges in a architectural building, I think. So this is what I have to say.
So a follow-up question by Ms. Noura. What she meant was, is there like an architectural construction, a building of some sort?
Yes, the Narita airport, the Terminal 3 of Narita airport.
Understood. Okay, with that, Dr. Abdullah, we conclude our session today. We would like to thank you for your participation with us, and we would like to thank our attendees for their patience and their valid collaboration with us. All right.
Thank you
we
very
would like to thank. Yep. We wish you all a pleasant night. Thank you again, Ms. Dr. Abdullah.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.